Hi, Shabbat Shalom everyone. Moshe Taragin from the Gush. We should hear Besoros Tovos, and we're constantly davening, and thank you for being part of the experience wherever you are, joining us in our tefillos, joining us in our Avinu Malkeinus, and of course, joining us as we continue to learn and celebrate Torah. Parashat Chayei describes or is dominated by two very parallel but different negotiations. There's some genealogy and children of, and of course, but there are two main narratives, the two main storylines are two negotiations. The first negotiation is between Avram and the people of Hebron for a burial plot for a deceased wife. The second round of negotiations are between Avraham's agent, the Eved, we know him to be Eliezer, but his identity is submerged or suppressed in Parashat Chayei, with Lavan and Besuel and the people of Aram Naharaim for a new wife for Yitzchak. One negotiation about a deceased wife, one negotiation about a new wife. You'd be surprised how similar these two negotiations are, and the Torah wants to parallel them so that the one major difference is exposed and becomes overt. What are the parallels between the two negotiations? There are a lot, I'll just mention a few. For example, each negotiation unfolds through 3 rounds. Negotiations are never easy. There are different rounds of negotiation. So Avram first meets Bnei Ches, and he talks with them, and then they refer him to Ephron, and he talks with him, and the next day he talks again with Ephron. And each of these rounds of Avram is punctuated by him bowing down to the locals. After the first round, he bows down to them as a show of politeness and agreement. The second round with Ephron is concluded by him bowing. Then the final round, where the money is exchanged, he bows. There are effectively 3 rounds in Aram Naharaim as well. The first round is the negotiation with Rivka. Who is your father? Does he have a place for me to sleep? He bows, of course, not to Rivka, but to Hashem. The next round is conducted between this servant of Abraham and this daughter, this girl's parents and brother, and it ends with them agreeing and him thanking Hashem by bowing. Then the next day they want a final check. Let's just ask her, maybe she doesn't want to go, let her stay a little. And she agrees, I want to go right now, and the Eved Avram bows. So there are parallels because there are 3 rounds, each punctuated or segregated, partitioned by bowing. Each of the negotiations, as they always do, have middlemen. You have to go through the initial parties, the people on the outer office to get to the inner office, the secondaries to get to the primaries. So Avram has to first go through the Bnei Ches, that obstacle course of trying to find who's the one I need to talk to. Then finally gets to the big man, the big boss, Evron. The same thing happens with Eved Avram. He's in Aram Naharaim, and he's talking with Rivka, but he knows the real decision will fall with the father and the brother who he has to get to. So there are middlemen, there are sirsurim to these two negotiations. Of course, there's always going to be money exchange, and the kesef that Avram delivers to Ephron for this land becomes legendary. It's called Kicha Miste Ephron. This becomes the source of kesef kiddushin, the source that you can not just acquire a plot for your deceased wife, but you can actually start a new marriage with kesef kiddushin. And Eved Avram brings a lot of riches and nezem and smidim, and there's a lot of ultimately kesef that's exchanged, either gifts or money. Each of them takes place in a very, very public setting, in a very iconic setting. The negotiations over the land in Hebron take place l'chol ba'ei shar iro, at the gates of the city. One of the places people of antiquity would congregate, would affect major transactions, major deals, major agreements, whereas the negotiations in Aram Naharaim take place they take place at the watering hole and the waterways where people would gather for very important business as well. So the Torah tries to, excuse me, my voice is still a little weak. Torah tries to parallel these two negotiations. And then there's a 5th similarity, but it's very different. There are spectators who aren't the principals to the negotiations, but they are mentioned too often, redundantly, excessively. The Bnei Ches aren't going to determine whether this land is sold, but they're mentioned 10 times. Read it in the Parashat 10 times. Now, even more bizarre is who are the spectators for the negotiations in Aram Naharaim? It's not Eliezer, he's the principal. It's not Rivka, she's the subject. It's not Lavan and Besuel. You know who the spectators are in Aram Naharaim? It's the camels. The camels aren't mentioned 10 times, they're mentioned 12 times. There are 12 references to the camels. Why is the Torah so obsessed with the fashtunk of the camels? Who cares? Why are they so iconic and symbolic to the story? These are our questions. Two negotiations, very, very similar. Spectators, b'nei ches, spectators, gimalim. What's the difference between these two? The real difference is that the negotiation in Aram Harayim is very fluid. Everyone's fallen over themselves to agree, to accede. Sure, you're the Eved Avram, take her. Okay, there's a little delay the next morning. Should we wait a year? But everything is very smooth, very successful. There's no tension. Everyone's happy for the negotiations to be successful. Whereas the negotiations in Hebron about a plot of land should be really simple. It's a humanitarian cause. You're not talking about major land acquisitions, a plot 4 feet by 2 feet, whatever, 5 feet by 3 feet. And it's just very, very stuttering and halting. And you sense that if you look carefully at the psukim, no one is really talking to each other. No one really understands each other. The narratives are different. So Avram says, listen. They tell him, Shma'inu Adoni, listen, you're in a silicon, but of course, I'm listening. You don't have to tell me to listen. You're talking to me. But they're on different wavelengths. And there's a lot of stops and starts. Vayedaber itam lemor. Vayan Ephron, he answers. And then listen to this. Vayan Ephron, and he says, very awkward, Lo Adoni Shma'ini. Again, is he saying yes or no? Lo? No, Adoni Shma'ini. You're talking to someone. You don't have to say listen. You're on the same conversation. And then later, Vayedaber Ephron, Avram speaks to Ephron, Imata Lushmaini. If you'll please listen to me. There's a lot of Vayans, Vayedabers, Be'aznei b'nei ches, they're not talking to each other. So there's something very different about what's happening in Hebron as opposed to what's happening around the Ram. Everyone's on the same wavelength. Everyone's talking. Communication's great. In Hebron, no one's really on the same wavelength. Everyone's talking around one another. Please listen to me. Don't listen to me. Yes, no. B'nei ches, listen to me. What's the difference? Why does the Torah want us to see the difference between these two negotiations? The answer is as follows. Chayei is when Avram's historical mission shifts into full gear. And it's not just shifting into full gear, but it's exporting many aspects of his ideological revolution. This trip of the servant of Avraham is the first time that Avram will successively spread his message outside of Eretz Yisrael. The only previous opportunity he had was in Mitzrayim, and we all know how that ended. Not favorably. The wheels fell off. Avram was over his skis. It was the beginning of his career. And since then, he's been localized to Eretz Yisrael, trying his best as he can to make inroads. Now, he's exporting some of his ideas. This is not just a trip to find a woman. This is a trip to exchange his ideas and to send them internationally. That's why the camels are so important. If you don't have camels, you can't travel outside of Israel. If you want to travel from Hebron to the Akedah, you just take a donkey. It's 3 days. I'm sitting right now in Gush Etzion on the route between Hebron and Har Moriah. You take a donkey and you walk. To get to Syria or Iraq, you need camels who can travel many days at a time, limited water supply, and are fit for traveling through hot desert and hot arid lands. So the fact that Torah mentions the camels so often, on the one hand, demonstrates that Avram is globalizing and is spreading his message beyond the immediate vicinity. And he doesn't just travel, Eved Avram, he travels, and we see throughout Bereshis that Lavan, both through his encounter with Eved Avram, he mentioned Hashem's name in this week's Parsha, and he certainly mentions Hashem's name after the 20 years that he lives with Yaakov. So these two trips, the Eved Avram's trip and Yaakov's stay, are introducing that part of the world to monotheism, to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And he's not just spreading religious ideals, he's also delivering bracha. Part of Abraham's challenge and mission is Veyei Bracha, to spread the wealth and to spread the riches and to spread the welfare to the entire world. It's part of the monotheistic message. Hashem's will is enhancing to the human condition, and if you serve Hashem, your plight and your fate improves. That's the second reason the Gemalim are so important, the camels. Because what were they carrying? They were carrying riches and treasures and prosperity. And the key phrase that reminds us is that when the Eved Avram arrives in Aram Naraim, Vayavrech es ha-Gemalim. Vayavrech is a play on words. On the one hand, he makes the Gemalim squat. When camels rest, they squat. Milashon berach, from the knee. On the other hand, we all know that Vayavrech sounds a lot like bracha. So the Gemalim were squatting, and they were also delivering bracha to Lavan. and that's why they exchange gifts and semidim and jewelry and money. So the trip to Aram Naharaim and the negotiations are about whether the Jewish message of prosperity and monotheism and the advance of the human condition, Avram is spreading all those large ideas, and you know what? The world is really happy and eager to accept all these great ideas that the Jews represent. Monotheism, science, progress, human welfare, the dignity of the human condition, everything about the second negotiation, which is not just an expedition to find a wife, but to spread the message of Avram and of monotheism through the long distance travel. And you're also, those same camels that are carrying people are carrying welfare. Everyone's thrilled to accept. Then there's a second part of Jewish legacy and Jewish mission, and that is to spread all those messages from this land and to live in the land of Hashem under the eye of Hashem. That message and that legacy and that historical mission, no one's really excited about. People in Bnei Chais are not really excited to give Avram a simple little burial plot for his wife. And it takes a lot of negotiations, and the communication is horrible, and no one's listening to each other. And one thing that Avram says, they don't understand. They're constantly saying, please listen to me. No, I will give. No, I won't give. Here's the money. There's no money. This is this historical struggle that we are now living through in 2023. The world has already opened its arms to the Jewish mind and the Jewish heart and the Jewish spirit. And the world has recognized that Jews have contributed to human welfare, to science, to progress, to the modern condition, and that the world is willing to accept. Jewish culture, Jewish ideas, Jewish religion. But there's a second part to Jewish mission, and that's living in the land of Hashem, under the eye of Hashem, and broadcasting all those messages from this land where we currently sit. We're now sitting about, 7-8 miles away from Hebron. And then as now, and now as then, that message is a lot harder for the world to accept. And sadly, their non-acceptance and resistance to that second part, our right and our mission to live in front of Hashem in His land, is souring them even to the first mission. And it's causing a backwash and a backlash of anti-Semitism. And the world is dirty with the Jews, rather than recognizing how much Jews have contributed to the human condition and to human welfare. So we're now living squarely in 2023, November 2023, we are now living squarely in the heart of the struggle of Parashat Chayei. We endeavor to change the world through the human spirit and the Jewish spirit, and now we're struggling to convince the world that Hashem wants us in this land for their benefit, not as colonialist invaders, but as people who are returning to the land Hashem delivered them on behalf of humanity. Because when we're in this land serving Hashem, the welfare that we deliver radiates. The second negotiation in Chayei and the spread of the welfare could only happen once Avram acquired a little bit of land in Hebron. The second negotiation could not have happened without the first. And there would be no welfare and no veheye bracha if we don't live in the land of Hashem. So the world is broken, and those two narratives are still shattered, and one narrative's failure is affecting the success of the other narrative, but we know those two narratives are merged and integrated. So we continue with our faith to convince the world that we're not invaders or interlocutors, but we belong in this land. It will take us a while, but when we reach it, Harninu Gayim Amo, the world will celebrate us. Hodul Hashem Kitov, Haluas Hashem Kol Goyim Shabchu Kol Homim Ki Gavra Aleinu Chasdei. When Hashem shows us His chesed, the world will acknowledge and accredit and receive the bracha that they stubbornly refuse to accept. Shabbat Shalom.